Hello everyone, my name is Lydia, and today, if I can adjust myself here, I'm going to be talking about Confederacy of Dunces. I just recently finished this book, although I've had it for years now, and I just never read it. And I have thoughts on this book. I have thoughts, okay? And I don't know if these thoughts are popular. I know that this book is very well loved. Everybody seems to adore this book. Though I've seen just a few people say that they couldn't get through it. It was too much for them. So let's get into that. I like this book, I think. I don't think I will be keeping it though, is the thing. Like, my plan is that when I see what are those little libraries that you can like pick a book, take a book type of deal, when I see one of those, I'm probably gonna be putting this in there, because I think this is a book that a lot of people could enjoy, but for me, I don't think I'll be reading it again. And my reasoning behind that is, well, maybe I should talk about the things I like about the book first, okay? Because it's very well written, like very well written, I think. John Kennedy Toole, the author, sadly, if you look into the origins of this book, you'll quickly find out that the author never got to see his book become published and become as popular as it has been, which is quite sad. But it is, I don't know, it is a good read. It is very well written. And what I mean by that is that I really enjoyed how, see, I'm not a reader, by the way. I should probably preface this. I'm not on Book Talk. This is really the first book that I've read in a while, because I was sick for a long time too, which made it almost impossible for me to like read books. But in my adult life so far, I haven't been much of a reader, but I lately have been more into reading, which is interesting. And so this was kind of one of the first books that I've read in a little while, but I'm getting back into reading, which is kind of cool. And so, you know, I'm looking at this through a lens of somebody who's not a reader, somebody who doesn't experience, many differences between authors and writing styles and all of that. I do remember like growing up noticing the difference between different writers and their writing styles, so maybe I would as an adult probably, but I just don't read enough to get so much experience. But this book, I would say, was well written because he did a really good job of making sure every single character had such a strong personality that came through in how they spoke and the words that they chose to speak. And this does take place in New Orleans. I know some people pronounce it differently than I do, but New Orleans, and so there is a heavy accent throughout the book, but every character speaks so vastly different from each other, to the point where several characters can be having dialogue and he doesn't have to necessarily say this character said this, or give an indication who was speaking at the time, but you kind of know who was speaking at the time, which I really loved. I thought that was really cool. I also really appreciated how the narrator wasn't like its own thing. You know what I mean? Like the narrator changed the way it spoke depending on who was just speaking, or depending on where the things were just taking place, if that makes sense. So instead of like, okay, the characters are all doing their thing, oh, and then the narrator sort of summing it up in its voice that it continues to use, it will sum things up through the lens of the person who just spoke, which is so cool. I really loved that. And maybe some authors do that out there. Again, I don't have experience with that, but I think I just really liked that a lot. And it kind of inspired me a little bit, like, oh, I never even thought of writing in that way. I'm more of a writer than I am a reader, which some people say is a little taboo. You shouldn't do that, but anyway. What else did I like about this book? I did like that the characters were so colorful. You know what I mean? Like every single character was super themselves and super they were just like, you can imagine them so vividly because they are such a character, which I appreciated. Nobody was dull in this at all. Okay, some of the things that I didn't like was just jumping right into the things I didn't like, I guess, because I think it was a hard read a little bit at times because I kept hoping that the main character Ignatius was going to be a redeemable person. Which I don't know if I should consider that a spoiler. I don't think it really is, so, but I'll put spoiler in the title if I do spoil anything. I just was really hoping throughout the book that he at some point was going to be redeemable, and he just never was. And that really was hard to read. Although I will say, like, in the beginning, seeing how insufferable he really was, I was like, I don't know if I'm really gonna find this book that funny. Like, I think I'm just gonna be kind of like carried along on these adventures with this character, and these were kind of my assumptions when I was first reading it, and starting to gather that this character was really quite, I don't want to say unlikable, but quite terrible, if I'm being honest. I really did. I thought that it was just, I just wasn't going to find it funny, but I did end up finding it funny, which was cool. It's hard not to find this book funny because he is such a character, such a dramatic character. And I think I did have to remove my sort of empathy a lot while reading this book, because so much of the time I found myself caring a lot about what became of the characters, or that they get some redemption arc, or that they are treated kindly by Ignatius at some point in the book. Like Ignatius' mother. I just, I did have that in my head a lot throughout this book, and then I had to really remove that, and I'm glad that I kind of did, and just sort of let the book take me where it was going to, instead of feeling like, I really hope this happens, because once I removed that, I did find out in the end that none of those things were really resolved, per se. It is interesting because, like, they do touch on every single character and where they end up, sort of, but after being done reading this, I am sort of left with this, like, this sense and this feeling that these characters are still existing and their life is still happening and moving on, and they're still going through new adventures like at the point where the author left them, if that makes sense. You know? So that's kind of nice. But I definitely had to remove my own like wants, I guess, or hopes. And my own like caring for some of the characters, you know what I mean? Like, we don't know if everything works out in the end for, well, one, Ignatius. We have no idea. We can all kind of imagine what's going on. We all kind of like can imagine like where his life is going to take him from there, but we don't know for sure. And even his mom, like, we have no idea where her life is going to take her after this, really. You know, we all kind of think that maybe she'll get married, and I think that's a big possibility for her, but we don't know, you know? And I guess that's kind of the charm of it, is this author, I mean, it's kind of fascinating because I'm like, did he mean to do this? I guess he meant to do this, because it feels like this book just sort of leaves in the middle of everything, in a way, leaves everything hanging, and it feels almost incomplete in a sense, but yet I guess it didn't wrap anything up in a bow, if that makes sense. So many of the characters are sort of left without this perfect ending, you know, which is sort of, and life moves on for them, or, you know, this is what's happening in their life now. And you're like, oh. And that really caught me off guard. That really caught me off guard. I was approaching the last few pages and I was like, wait, there's no way he can wrap up every single story in these last few pages. Don't tell me it ends here. And it did. It was kind of crazy. But I don't know. I also, it's like bittersweet in a way, the fact that we are never going to have a second book. You know what I mean? Like, because I just think that would be so interesting. Even though I don't plan on returning to this book, I think it would be really interesting to see where Ignatius' life takes him. You know what I mean? And like, does he actually end up with Myrna Minkoff? You know what I mean? Because like, there's so much there that I feel like they could end up together. They could, but we don't know for sure. You know, and so much, I mean, Ignatius is pretty insufferable, but so is Myrna, kinda, you know? So I don't know. It's hard to say, but I would love to see the adventure that they are taking on. And I really feel like that could have been made into a second book, like truly. But of course, we're lucky to even have this book. You know what I mean? I don't know. I also think I would have really liked to have things wrapped up with a lot of the characters a little bit better. Like, yes, the officer, oh, his name is escaping me right now, but the officer throughout the book, yes, he gets kind of recognition in the end, but like, there's something about that feels off-putting, because I'm like, really, you've been mistreated this whole time and just forced to go on these adventures wearing crazy costumes. You know, and then you get mistreated by your sergeant or you know, whatever they called him, I forget. I'm like, are you sure you even want to be a cop anymore? Like, I mean, I guess that's where your heart and soul's at, buddy, but like, maybe rethink your whole life career path, you know. I don't know, and I really don't think, you know, I don't necessarily think that the mom is best paired with the guy who is afraid that everybody's a communist. But then again, maybe they are, you know, and these are things that we'll never know. And I really love how every single story really did tie in together. Like, they all collided together at some point. Every single character that was mentioned ended up crossing over the paths with another character, and I really thought that was so cool how that was done. And it's really, at the end of the day, just a collection of crazy, interesting characters who come together in crazy hijinks. And when you least expect it, they'll all collide at some point. And I really think that was so fun. I think my favorite moments in the book were when Ignatius worked at Levy Pants. Is it Levi or Levy? I think it's Levy. Again, I'm not a reader. I really liked his time there, and I wished so bad that he stayed there. I do. Just because I wasn't done having fun with what could happen with that. But I did also like the hot dog cart. I thought that was a very fun little job for him. It was all pretty great, though. Though it was a hard read for me, again, because it's like, I think it's pretty apparent that Ignatius is neurodivergent, of some sort. And I think also with that, I would be willing to bet that he has antisocial personality disorder, sociopathic in some aspect, and just having dealt with the negative sides of dealing with a real life antisocial personality disorder family member. I think it's hard to read characters or read about characters that, or even watch characters for that matter, who have that disorder or who consistently mistreat people without having some sort of character development. But that is kind of the charm of this book, you know what I mean? Is he is this very over-the-top, flamboyant, if you will, character who really doesn't have any redeemable qualities, if I'm being quite honest. I also thought it was really interesting how he has such an interesting worldview, Ignatius does. His whole medievalist sort of belief system I find to be very interesting. I have yet to look into what a medievalist is and if there are other people out here in the world who are medievalists, or was that just a thing that Ignatius sort of made up? I don't know, but I really thought that was kind of interesting. And it was an interesting worldview and an interesting point. I liked his writings. I thought they were very typical of Ignatius. But I also appreciated how Ignatius talked a certain way, and then when he was in his writing voice, or like when he was writing, the writings were so like almost Ignatius trying to be not wiser, but like be more profound, if that makes sense. And it came through so clearly when the author wrote that. I thought that was really cool. Anyway, but it was really hard. It was really hard because he's just, he treats other people poorly, and a lot of the characters in the book treat each other very poorly. You know what I mean? That poor old woman at Levy Pants. I don't remember her name either, but that poor old woman just being dragged around by Mrs. Levy and having to work there without being in retirement. I'm like, give that woman a break, somebody. Oh, gosh. I felt so bad for her throughout reading it. But it was a good read overall. I would definitely recommend reading it if you like a funny sort of a story. But if you find insufferable, flamboyant, over-the-top sort of characters that have no redeeming qualities, if you would find that sort of vibe annoying and hard to read, then I probably wouldn't recommend it. But it is funny. Very funny. And I do enjoy how it also touched on a lot of issues of the time. I believe it takes place in the 60s. The 60s in New Orleans. And a lot of the issues of the time being that there was a lot of segregation still, and a lot of people of color were uneducated at the time and given poor work quality. Just a lot of interesting topics that were discussed in this book and brought up in this book, but weren't, there wasn't like a moral justice about this book, but it was involved in the book. And it almost like allowed you to peer into this moment in history in the 1960s in New Orleans, what it would have been like in that point in time, and how things were beginning to progress and change. Like even conversations among the average person of the time, you know what I mean, was changing and evolving in terms of acceptance, but also still sometimes people were a bit closed off, and I think that's kind of an interesting it was an interesting point of view to read about. Also, I guess there were fears of people being communists, back around that time, which is interesting in itself. And then you get to hear the sides of what Myrna Minkoff is going through, and how she is definitely trying to push and advocate for more liberal leaning mindsets with her protests and her speeches that she's attempting to give, although not necessarily for the right reasons a lot of the time. Gosh. But that was kind of interesting. I thought that was really kind of a fascinating point of view to be reading about. Other things I wanted to say about this book were just that when you look into sort of the origins of the book, it's kind of interesting. Just how this book came to be, a little bit about John Kennedy Toole and his story, and also how this, I thought this was kind of interesting when I was looking into it, is that this book has never been made into a movie. And I believe the reason behind that is because every time they try to make it into a movie, somebody unalives or something on set to make it not happen. And it's very, very strange, very eerie. And it's like, why is that happening? We don't know. But either way, this book has never been made into a movie, although it seems like it would be so great as a movie, truly. I would love it. Of course, book adaptations into movies are just, They're never that great, are they? But I still think it would be kind of interesting, especially if they did it right, of course. I think it would be fantastic. With that, I also saw that there was a play done of this, okay, where Nick Offerman, who is quite famous, he was from Parks and Rec back in the day. He's done a lot of other things too, but he played Ignatius on stage, and the sad thing about that is that you can't find the actual full-length thing online. You can only find little clips of it on YouTube, and they are great. And I'm like, I want to see the full thing. Him dressed up as Ignatius was everything I needed and more. It was pretty great. So look that up. The photos in itself are pretty funny. Just seeing Nick Offerman already with his mustache, you know what I mean? And he's got some prosthetic like belly, and it's quite a look with his green cap. But all in all, pretty good. That's my review of this book. Pretty good. Won't read again because that was a little challenging to get through. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. I think it's also hard for me, just emotionally, to read or listen to people berating each other back and forth. That's like, I'm a girl who doesn't watch any violence or any swearing or anything like that on TV. Like it's a lot for me. And so that was a little rough getting through too, is because a lot of the characters don't have a great relationship with each other, and it's a lot of berating each other. I mean, everything that comes out of Ignatius' mouth is pretty awful. He's just pretty much an awful character, but he's also very humorous. So take that and do with it what you will. That was my review of A Confederacy of Dunces.